Hello there, welcome back to our show. This is the only show I'm doing this week. I'm taking a week off. Generally, but I'm going to talk about Batman before I return to rest. So so the Batman is a new Batman film, written and directed by Matt Reeves, starring Robert Pattinson, Colin Farrell, Zoe Kravitz, John Turturro. There's a lot of good actors in here. There's no one in this cast is a big movie star name. They're kind of avoiding that in this one. They should just try to cast actors and use the Batman himself, the Batman myth, as the selling point, which seems to have done well because it's doing well overseas and in America. Obviously, I can't talk, but yeah, it's doing well. Especially for a 3-hour film that's actually in the UK's 15 certificate, which is probably higher rated than expected. So yeah, I mean it's one of those ones when you see it, it's not trying to be the Dark Knight. It's not trying to have that massive global appeal the same way. It's a much quieter film. It's less action. So it's a much different type of film than what's come before. But it is very good. I should say that I like this one better than Dark Knight stuff. I think it's my favourite of the live actions outside the Tim Burton films. But it's in that kind of... It seems to be coming from the same area as those films. It's a moody Batman film where Batman's a bit of a lunatic, which is my preference of Batman. It starts out looking it's going to be a much more realistic Batman, but it's not quite. It's film noir, and it's much more film noir than the Nolan stuff. The Nolan stuff had bits of film noir, but had lots of scenes taking place during the day. The international espionage stuff had all these like crazy League of Shadow stuff, and they were epic. They were trying to be massive epics. This one takes place in Gotham and never leaves Gotham. It doesn't try and do the massive Zack Snyder thing of Batman fighting like aliens and stuff like that. There's none of that stuff in this one. It's not campy like the Schumacher stuff. But it does seem much more like what Tim Burton was doing, even though it's not doing the same thing at all either. But it just feels more linked to that as this weird character piece taking place in Gotham that kind of ignores the rest of the world. It's just Gotham's a world into itself. So, it starts out looking a bit more realistic than normal Batman, but as it goes on, it feels much more like this is a fantastical version of Batman in itself. It's just not having, like, fantastical characters look very strange or anything. It's just like they try and make them look more realistic than normal, but they're still treated as fantastical characters. They're not treated as... This does not have the pretensions of the Dark Knight films, where it was almost like I think it's more the fans than Nolan himself, actually. Whereas this is the realistic take on Batman, which it wasn't. The Dark Knight trilogy had lots of flaws. It had massive glaring plot holes. It's very enjoyable, but it had massive plot holes all over the place that the fans never really liked to admit to. And we get mad at you, we point them out, So, I mean, it was that thing. It's like, it was so hyped up when it came out. Now, you can approach it as, that's a take on Batman. There's been other takes on Batman. There will be other takes on Batman. There we go. This one is its own universe. It's not trying to be anyone else. But it kind of goes towards my take on Batman. Batman's crazy. And Batman doesn't say much unless he has to say anything. Batman is in the shadows a lot. He's thinking a lot. There's also, he's not a playboy. I mean, that was a big thing. Was a thing that this film can criticise for, and it's exactly the same thing that Burton's films get criticised for, because in that one, Michael Keaton's character is not a playboy. He's a weirdo that everyone knows has money, but even in his own party, he can disappear and no one really notices him. He's a kind of quiet guy who's off to the side. In this one, he's the same, even more, almost like a younger version of that kind of thing, where he's even more isolated and even less socially able, if that was possible. I never thought that was possible, but it is. So they're going that kind of template. He's much more of a detective in this one. He's not the fantastical, weird Tim Burton characters in this weird world. He's a bit more detective-y, but that's the focus of the film, is a mystery of what Batman's trying to solve. I'm not sure the mystery itself is actually that much more complicated than other Batman films, ultimately, but it's the process of him figuring it out is much more prominent. I mean, I think we actually see what the mystery is. It's like, well, that it makes sense, but it doesn't feel like it's something like it's not as complicated as you think it was going to be by all this build up. But the enjoyable thing is treat it like a detective story and actually see him try to figure out the clues and not the clues made obvious to him. He has to try and figure them out slowly but surely. And the one good thing this version of the character is he's not a dummy. Because the big problem I had with the Nolan stuff was the Batman was a bit thick. Like, he always had the Morgan Freeman character, Lucius Fox, always there to provide him with technology, to figure out a lot of the stuff for him. It was like, he's meant to be the world's great detective, and he's not that bright. You know, it was always a frustration for me. It was like, when being told this is the great Batman adaptation, it's like, well, he's not smart as the normal Batmans. So, he's just smart compared to George Clooney Batman, which isn't hard. So, there is that element to it. It's like, he is a detective. And the film itself isn't interested in massive action scenes. There are two big action scenes in the film. The one in the middle, which is really good, was a car chase where the people in the car chase have to deal with gridlock and other cars, and people just driving home that aren't out their way, which is great because it's like it's a thing that when Freakin does the car chases where he takes a car chase and then throws it into what you'd have to deal with in real life and have all the frustration because they come out. It's like, what would you have to deal with to get a car chase? And this film is much more like that. And this one actually reminds me a lot of To Live and Die in LA. This sense of a dislocated character and, you know, someone who's part of a world but not really, and he's on weird obsessions, and his psychosis is like creates an expansive character that causes all this chaos. It has a kind of Friedkin-esque element to it, because Friedkin did reality, but also is a bit above reality at the same time. And the first film has that kind of same kind of feel. And it also reminds me a lot of Michael Mann. Michael Mann's not been brought up because it was such an obvious influence on Christopher Nolan. Like, no one's bringing him up for this, but they'll say, oh, it's Seven, oh, it's Fincher stuff and Zodiac. And eventually, yeah, but it doesn't feel like Fincher in the way it's constructed. It feels much more like Manhunter with the detective. I don't know about Peterson performance. A detective going through the clues slowly but surely, trying to work out something that is very difficult to work out. It's dealing with a person's pain. He has to try and decipher what the pain is that's causing this behaviour. And there's that kind of much more classical, slow-paced mystery there that actually works. So, they say Seven, but it feels much more like Thomas Harris influence thing here. That's the kind of vibe I got from the actual construction of the story. Seven, it felt like Seven was more... I mean, in some ways, it is like Seven because it is visually very dark. And it has a serial killer element to it. But and it is kind of gimmicky because it's a comic book, and it does go towards a gimmicky towards the end. But there's other elements. It's not as pretentious as Seven. Seven seems to think it's about the real world. This one, it's a Batman story that has ties to the world we see around us, but it's obviously a Batman story. It has a kind of... That's one thing about Matt Reeves films. He's making genre films. The genre films can actually have elements of the real world in them, but he's still making genre films. He still senses he respects what he's making, as he's making this example of a genre story. It's not really... There's not that kind of pretentious elevation sometimes you get with some directors who think they're above what they're making. You don't really get that in this film. It does feel like it's some interesting director, but it's also part of our tradition of storytelling, rather than I'm above it all, which is just something that happens with some directors. They think they're above it all. So there is a kind of a wonderful detective story element. Noir's very good, and the sense of the world is terrific. It shoots in a lot of places like Liverpool and Glasgow for Gotham City, so it's all run down. And I recognise certain places from Glasgow in it. That was quite nice to see. And the whole atmosphere is this rundown city. And if you know Cosmopolis, it's quite fun to watch Pattinson as Batman playing a character another billionaire who's jaded by life and trying to find meaning in some way. This is the comic book version of that kind of character. So it's quite funny if you're a fan of Cronenberg to see what a Cronenberg actor can look like in Batman. And it's also funny that Colin Farrell was originally meant to play that character, and he's playing the Penguin in this film. And his makeup's great. He's really terrific as a Penguin, who's not in it that much, but when he's in it, he makes a mark. It's the same with John Turturro as Falcone, who's one of the big villains. He's not in it that much, but he's a very good actor, and when he was in it, you feel his impact. And the good thing about the story is, I'm trying not to be spoilery, but it is about these important people in the community being killed one after another. And it pays off. Like, the reason why they're doing it pays off logically. The reason why the Riddler is targeting these people does pay off. And the reason why they're doing it is complicated but also very short-sighted, which is something that happens in real life where you see people do something that is like, well, you'll make an impact for one day, then you're going to jail. And that's that kind of feeling in this film. It's like, it's not a plan that's got legs, but it's an interesting plan that would actually feels plausible enough for people who are just pissed off with the world. It's that kind of element to it. It's there's nothing amazingly unique about the story, but it does feel plausible for what we see in the world, and the way some people react to the world, and how the world frustrates them, and how the corruption of the world frustrates them. And everyone is frustrated by the leaders in the world and the government, how corrupt they always seem to be. You know, and this takes that frustration, but it's like the wrong way to deal with it. Not that Batman's a good way to deal with it, but that's a fantastic way to deal with it. So there's lots of elements in there that's well done, but it's a Batman film. And remember, it's a Batman film. They do have a big action scene at the end, but it's quite enjoyable because Batman's still learning on the job. Like, there's a couple of pratfalls when he's still not quite used to his equipment and fighting this kind of level of fights. So it can be cool in certain scenes, but other scenes he's not quite used to doing the different things as Batman. So he sometimes stumbles his way through some fight scenes, which actually makes him much more human and makes it really work. But there's also a really good thing of Batman's quiet and he's observant and he's always looking, he's always thinking. You're watching it, and that's one of the reasons that remind me of Michael Keaton's Batman is you're watching someone who's thinking their way through things, and they only see so much, so you have to interpret a lot from them. It's like there's a lot of their psychosis and craziness they're never going to explain to anybody. It's just there in their eyes, and it's just a really terrific performance. That's probably why it's one of my favourites of the Batman. Is I really like this Batman. I like their approach to Batman is like, yeah, he's messed up. It's like there's none of this garbage you get with the thing I don't like about the Nolan stuff. Really, was Batman in an outplan at the end. It's like this character has to be in for life and crazy enough to think that's a good idea. You know, if you're crazy enough to put the batsuit on, I don't see you having it out, and that's what I didn't like about the Nolan stuff. Is like he's out. It doesn't really feel in character. At least for me, it doesn't. And this one, you can tell he's doomed. The more or less say at the end is like, it's not going to end well for you. It's like this is not a good idea. And there's just a mood that seeps through the film that way. It's just this sense of they're using the Batman character to show this kind of endless turmoil of someone who's good in a dark path. Even though he's trying to do it for the right reasons, he's still really screwed up and messed up, and he's no one's idea of a sane character. So there is just this mood to the film that just keeps churning through of just this character who's not quite sure of himself, but trying to put on a facade. Also, if you like the kind of 70s Batman, where it was much more detective comics and there's a lot more Batman and Commissioner Gordon trying to investigate crimes, this has a lot of that in there as well, which is my kind of the thing I like is I like the relationship between Gordon and Batman. So it's quite nice to see them as a double act for a lot of the time because they try to investigate this mystery. So that's really nice because that's the kind of story I like for a Batman story. Because a lot of time Batman's kind of a loner. And you don't want to put him with Robin, but you want to put him with somebody sometimes so he has to interact. So this relationship works really nicely, and Jeffrey Wright's a very good Gordon. You get the warmth of God from him, his performance you expect from that character. The guy who has to deal with the real world and all these corrupt people all the time, and also dealing with this lunatic Batman who's not exactly sane. Zoe Kravitz is terrific Catwoman. You know, very different from Michelle Pfeiffer. It's a different take. It's a more damaged urban take rather than the more fantastical Tim Burton world where it's much more metaphor for craziness and how women can go crazy and no one cares. That's a different type of story. This one is much more of she's self-sufficient early on, and it's like her slowly becoming a thief and slowly finding a place in the world. Same way as Batman is. It just works really nicely. And it's not the end of the story. The same way it's not the end of the story for the Riddler or for the Penguin. Everyone's just starting out. There's a couple of cameos suggesting things going forward for it. But it does that nice thing of, in a lot of Batman films, they have to kill the villains off because they have to pay the actors so much they can't bring them back. In this one, they cast character actors, and it's like, no, this is part one of a story. Like, no one has to. It has to be. It's about the creation of these characters. You know, it's not really a one and done type of situation, which again really works. It works really well. But the whole film is just very enjoyable. I mean, it really delivers on a moody Batman film. I'm hoping there's more. It seems to have done very well. I'm hoping that means they're going to do more because they've a good cast, they've a terrific world set up, they've a good director, and you're feeling that they've kind of set it up now that they can actually sort of go much more into much more interesting areas now. They've got everything locked down. They have a Riddler that works and is not silly, and who still could be threatening. They've got a Penguin that works that could be threatening. They've got a Catwoman who can play off Batman and is vulnerability. They've got a Batman who works in this area and who's nuts enough to actually push the story forward in odder ways. Like, he's not the shining light for the city. He's trying to be that, but he's also very flawed. So there's a lot of interesting areas to take it. So I'm hoping they'll go in this direction because there's a lot of good stuff here that can be explored. It is a very interesting, very unique version of the story. So hopefully we'll see more of that. So I hope you enjoyed the review. I try to not go into spoilers too much. But I think everything I said is stuff you can decipher from other things you've probably heard already. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back next week for some more, but that's me for this week. So I'll see you later. Right, bye.